Back in the 90s, there was a movie came out that I feel like I can confidently say probably most all of us have seen. And if we haven't seen it, we at least know it. And the movie was more or less about a boy who had a lot of toys in his room, and when he was not there, his toys came to life. And we're talking about Toy Story. While Toy Story is known maybe for, a lot of things, and we still see the popularity, especially of Buzz Lightyear and toys like that today, one of the things that Toy Story perhaps is more well known for may be one of the songs in that movie, "You've Got a Friend in Me." And when I was working through and thinking about the scripture that Ronnie read for us just a moment ago out of Ecclesiastes chapter 4, verses 9 through 12, I couldn't help but think about that song. And so I put it down as a title and I sent it on to Brandy, and then Brandy came in my office and she said, "Are you preaching about Toy Story on Sunday?" I said, "No, but it is there at the very beginning." But this morning what I want us to think about is this scripture that Ronnie has read for us out of Ecclesiastes chapter 4, verses 9 through 12. Because what Solomon tells us in his wisdom is about the importance of having good friends. You look just above this in the context, and Solomon has been talking about the vanity of selfishness. And one who is selfish in all that they do is one who, Ecclesiastes 4 and verse 8, is alone without companion. But then he immediately goes, beginning in Ecclesiastes chapter 4 and verse 9, to talk about the value of having good friends. And hopefully each of us here this morning can look around at everybody in this room, whether they're in front of us, beside us, behind us in these pews. Hopefully we can all look to each other and honestly say to one another, "You've got a friend in me." Yes, we're a family, we're brothers and sisters in Christ Jesus, but at the same time we ought to be friends. And that's because of what we see here in this text, that friends do for and with one another. And so the first thing we'll notice as we go through and work through this scripture together from Ecclesiastes 4 and verse 9 is that friends work together. If we can honestly and genuinely say to one another that you've got a friend in me, what we're saying is I'm able to work with you and you're able to work with me. Look again at Ecclesiastes chapter 4 and verse 9. "Two are better than one, because they have a good reward for their labor." Now, as we work through these points, we'll do it in a little bit of an untraditional sense, at least in the way I tend to go about my lessons. And so what we're going to do with each of these points is begin by thinking about what Solomon says from a historical and from a practical standpoint, but then make the application spiritually speaking. So thinking about this historically, it makes sense that two are always going to be more productive than one. It was true when Solomon wrote it way back when, but it's still true for us today. It's just practical application. That if I'm not having to do the work alone, chances are, especially if I'm working with someone I get along with, I'm able to get it done quicker. Perhaps I'm able to even do more than what I had intended to get done in the day. Work is much more productive because I don't have to do it alone, and because I have a friend who's there beside me to help encourage me along the way. Just think about whatever the job may be that we're doing. Maybe it's the case that I need someone to help hold a board up while I'm nailing it to the wall. Having a friend there to help is a huge, huge blessing. Maybe it's the case that I'm working on a new recipe in the kitchen and I need a friend who's there that can help taste test for me. Whatever the job is, it's a blessing to have a friend that we can work with. But we ought to be able to see this truth spiritually speaking as well. Jesus understood it. Perhaps that's why it is when we look in Mark chapter 6, as Jesus is sending out his 12 disciples on the limited commission. In Mark chapter 6 and verse 7, do you know how Jesus sends them out? In pairs, 2 by 2. But even beyond that, when we look in Luke chapter 10 and verse 1, when Jesus is sending out the 70 at that point, Jesus does the same thing again. Luke chapter 10 and verse 1, Jesus sends them out 2 by 2 before his face into every city and place where he himself was about to go. 2 are better than 1. Spiritually speaking, the work we are able to do is much more enjoyable and far more productive when we can do it together. You think about Paul and his missionary journeys. And you look through the book of Acts, and whenever it is that Paul's journeys begin, and we know there were many people involved helping him in that. But maybe we think back to Acts chapter 12 and verse 25, when Paul takes with him Barnabas and John Mark. Maybe we jump a little bit ahead into another one of his journeys, and we think to the end of Acts chapter 15, moving into chapter 16, where we see Paul bringing Silas and Timothy with him. But think about the encouragement that Paul would have needed. Yes, he was doing the Lord's work. Yes, there were times where there was great success had in cities, but there were other times when people didn't want to hear. There were times of imprisonment and times of discouragement. But what a blessing for Paul to always be able to turn, have a friend who was working with him to help encourage him through it all. And is that not the truth for us today? That there are times when we may be doing the spiritual work that we need to do. But sometimes we may get down on ourselves because we feel like we're not doing well enough, that there's not results that we're seeing. But if I've had a friend alongside me through it all, that friend is able to encourage me and lift me up. What a blessing it is to know that I'm not the only one trying to live like Jesus each day. What a blessing it is to know that I'm not the only one trying to begin Bible studies with others. What a blessing it is to know that when a Bible study begins, I can call on a friend and I can count on my friend to be there and to help me through that study. What a blessing it is to have a friend with which we can work. And I hope and pray we can say that to anyone here today, that you've got a friend in me because I'm willing to work with you. But more than friends simply working together, we look at what Solomon continues to say in Ecclesiastes chapter 4 and verse 10. And we find that if you have a friend in me, then you have someone who is willing to support you. Friends support each other. For if they fall, one will lift up his companion. But woe to him who falls alone, or who is alone when he falls, for he has no one to help him up. Sometimes we just need a friend to be there and to help pick us up when we've fallen. Now, historically speaking, thinking back to the days when Solomon is writing this in Ecclesiastes chapter 4, the roads and the sidewalks and things like that were not like we have today. It was not nice and level and smoothly paved and beautiful concrete there for an individual to walk on. But instead, many times the roads were very uneven. Many of the roads were very rocky. And so even the most experienced and the most fit travelers at times would find themselves struggling on some of these roads and some of these journeys that they would take. It didn't take much to fall and to hurt oneself. So what a blessing it would have been not to have to travel alone. What a blessing it would have been in that time to be able to have a friend who was there with you that when you fell would be able to support you and help get you back up. Thinking about it practically still today, think about any sports that you may watch. And we've all seen it if we've watched any amount of sports when an athlete injures themselves. And many times what happens when that athlete injures themselves? Their teammates are quick to be there next to them. What can we do? Making sure that our teammate is taken care of. At times it is the case that they may take an arm and put it under them and help support them. And sometimes you have one on either side of the injured athlete supporting them, helping them get back to the sidelines. Friends support each other in this way. Can we see the application spiritually? What a blessing it is to have friends who are here to spiritually support us when it is that we have stumbled or even fallen. If this applies to the physical falls of having someone there to support us and pick us back up, how much more does it apply in our spiritual walk? Galatians chapter 6 verses 1 and 2. Galatians chapter 6 verses 1 and 2 says, "Brethren, if a man is overtaken in any trespass, You who are spiritual, restore such a one in a spirit of gentleness, considering yourself, lest you also be tempted. Bear one another's burdens, and so fulfill the law of Christ. Do we understand what Paul is telling us in Galatians chapter 6, verses 1 and 2? He says that when we recognize from a brother or sister that if they have stumbled, if they have fallen, it's my responsibility to be there to support them, to help pick them back up and encourage them to keep moving forward. And as friends, that's what we do for one another. It may be the case at times that someone may come to us and someone may point out that we ourselves have stumbled and fallen, and we may not realize it ourselves. We might be quick in those moments to put up a front. We might be quick to get a little bit defensive and maybe to get a little bit angry. But we forget that this is a friend coming to us. They're not coming to us to try and bully us. They're not telling us these difficult and uncomfortable things that perhaps we've gotten wrong in our life and in our walk, just to belittle us, just to be mean to us. But instead, they're coming to us, telling us these things because they love us, because they want to support us, because that's what good friends do. Think about what Paul would write to the group of young Christians in Thessalonica. And in 1 Thessalonians chapter 5 and verse 14, as he's beginning to conclude his letter there and giving some final exhortations to the brethren, he says in 1 Thessalonians 5 and verse 14, "Now we exhort you, brethren, warn those who are unruly, comfort the faint-hearted, uphold the weak, be patient with all." What is he telling the brethren? Be there for each other. Support each other in whatever way that looks like. And that's what we as friends need to be doing. If we go to Hebrews chapter 12, getting toward the end of that particular letter, we have the Hebrews writer who's writing to this group of Christians that had a Jewish background. And the context behind the book is that there was a call to leave Christianity and to go back to Judaism, to go back to what they once knew and how they once lived. And the Hebrews writer is saying, don't do it. Don't turn back. Stay with Jesus. But at times, there's difficulty along the way. Sometimes we're going to grow tired and we're going to grow weary. And we need a friend to support us. So in Hebrews chapter 12, verses 12 and 13, we are told to strengthen the hands which hang down and the feeble knees, and make straight paths for your feet, so that what is lame may not be dislocated, but rather be healed. And what is done in Hebrews 12 and 13 is actually quoting from the prophet Isaiah in Isaiah 35, verses 3 and 4. And so when we put it all together to think about what we're told in Isaiah 35 and what we find in Hebrews 12, is that when times get tough, when there might be a temptation to go ahead and turn back or to stop doing the work that we need to be doing, what are we to do? Support one another. Strengthen each other. Be there for each other. And how do we do this? That's where Isaiah 35 comes into play. Because you keep looking through Isaiah 35, and what we're told immediately after Isaiah says these words in Isaiah 35, 3 and 4. The application, point others to God. Point them to Jesus Christ. How do we support our brethren? How do we support our friends when it is perhaps they have stumbled, when it is they are struggling? We support them by pointing them back to God. And what a blessing it is to know that we have so many friends that are willing to help us in this. That we have friends who are willing to work with us. That we have friends who are willing to support us. And as we keep looking in Ecclesiastes chapter 4 and we come to verse 11, we learn something else about friends. That friends comfort each other. If you read with me in Ecclesiastes chapter 4 and verse 11, Solomon goes on to say, "Again, if two lie down together, they will keep warm. But how can one be warm alone? Now, some have taken this particular verse and they've misapplied it, and they've twisted it and pulled it out of context and say, well, Solomon is talking about a relationship there that's not appropriate. But that's not what Solomon is doing in Ecclesiastes 4 and verse 11. No, Solomon is looking at this through that particular cultural perspective. And historically speaking, looking back in that time in the ancient Near East, or the Middle East, what we have is a situation where many times travelers would have to sleep outside. Even if they made it to an inn, oftentimes at the inn it wasn't like the Holiday Inn and Express today. But instead, they still found themselves sleeping outside just in the courtyard of that inn. So if an individual was traveling by themselves and it's a cold night, it was a bit more of a struggle. But if they had a friend with them on their journey, nothing inappropriate, but just a friend to be nearby as they would lie down and sleep at night, there's a little more warmth in that. If you've ever been camping, you've ever gone camping and it's colder outside at night, if you've done it by yourself, you've been in a small tent, you may have a sleeping bag, whatever else you need, but you still get kind of cold at night. But if you go camping with a friend, and you're both in the same tent together, you may not be right on top of each other, but you understand just having someone nearby, there's a little bit of warmth that comes from that. But also in that, there's a little more comfort. Because I don't have to worry about the bears and the raccoons and whatever else may try to get through my tent, right? But I have someone else there who's able to bring me comfort, to help warm me, to help keep me safe and secure, whatever the situation may be. And brethren, that's what we have in one another. That's what we have as friends. You think about it spiritually speaking, and of course we could make application here even to marriage. That yes, there's the literal perspective of this, of you have one who you're able to lie down next to at night, and there's warmth and there's comfort in that. But figuratively speaking, the warmth and the comfort extends far beyond that. Because you have someone who's there with you to help you brave the storms of life each and every day. But that's true even beyond marriage. As friends for one another, we need to be here for each other. That we need to be able to help comfort and warm one another when it is that we need it and our friends need it most. You go back to Job chapter 2. In Job chapter 2, we find where it is that Job's friends are coming to him. And I understand, you go through the remainder of the book of Job, and Job's friends didn't really get too much right. They had good intentions, but they weren't thinking about it clearly. But at the start, Job's friends did get it right. And I believe there's valuable lessons we can learn from them as far as how it is that we should be here to comfort each other. Job chapter 2, beginning in verse 11, we're told how it is that Job's 3 friends heard of all the adversity that had come upon him. Each one came from his own place. Eliphaz the Temanite, Bildad the Shuhite, and Zophar the Naamathite. For they had made an appointment together to come and mourn with him and to comfort him. And when they raised their eyes from afar and did not recognize him, they lifted their voices and wept. And each one tore his robe and sprinkled dust on his head toward heaven. So they sat down with him on the ground 7 days and 7 nights, and no one spoke a word to him, for they saw that his grief was very great. Put yourself in the shoes of Job. You've just lost everything. You've lost it all. Do you not think he was comforted to look up and to see those friends coming his way? Do you not think in those 7 days that Job felt a sense of warmth, knowing that his friends were there with him? They didn't even have to speak a word. But we understand what it means to have friends who are there to help comfort us. You look to the New Testament and you go to John chapter 19. John chapter 19, think about Jesus being on the cross. As Jesus is there and as Jesus is hanging on the cross, almost everyone had forsaken him. All had abandoned him, but Jesus looks down in verses 26 and 27. And who does he see? That disciple whom he loved. He sees John standing there next to his mother. What comfort do you think that brought to Jesus in that moment? To be able to have a friend who was there, that he could entrust the care of his own mother to. What a blessing friends are. Because true friends are not fair weather friends. True friends are going to be present in the good, but they'll also be present in the sometimes uncomfortable. And true friends are going to be present even through the hard and the difficult times of life, because that's what friends do. Friends work together. Friends support each other when they've fallen. Friends comfort one another and bring them warmth as best as they can. And lastly, from Ecclesiastes 4 and verse 12, friends are going to do what they can to defend each other. Notice again in Ecclesiastes 4, what's written for us in verse 12. Though one may be overpowered by another, two can withstand him, and a threefold cord is not quickly broken. There are some versions here that instead of talking about how it is that one may be overpowered and how it is, it says that they may be able to withstand him. Some versions actually say in this that though one may be overpowered, two can defend themselves. And that's really the idea that Solomon is getting at. He's talking about the way that friends are able to watch out for one another, to have each other's backs. Think about David in 2 Samuel chapter 21. 2 Samuel chapter 21, David was certainly glad to have a friend with him on the battlefield that day. David was getting older, but he still went out to battle with his army. And they're going out against the Philistines, and David thinks everything's going to be okay as it had always been before. But what David didn't realize is that there was a man in the Philistine army that was ready to kill him. But thankfully for David, he had a friend there next to him, able to defend and protect him and to save his life. Maybe we think about Jesus and his teaching of the parable of the Good Samaritan. And the reason that man finds himself in a situation of needing help from the Good Samaritan is because as he journeyed along the way, he was beaten and robbed and left for dead. That was not too uncommon in that time frame. But many times if someone traveled with a friend, it didn't always happen to them because you had more eyes watching. Because when it is, I might get past where the robbers are hiding, there's another friend right there behind me that's literally watching my back. That even if they jump out to attack, I have a friend next to me who's able to work to fight and defend and protect me. And spiritually speaking, this is what we as brethren, we as friends need to be doing for one another as well. Satan wants each and every single one of us. Jesus told Peter in Luke chapter 22, verse 31, that Satan desires you that he may sift you as wheat. And know that Satan wants to sift each one of us here today as wheat as well. Ephesians chapter 6, we are told in verse 10, to put on the whole armor of God that you may be able to withstand the wiles of the devil. Those wiles being the schemes of Satan. To know that he is crafty. To know that he's going to have tricks up his sleeve. To know that he's going to try to find ways to get you alone so that he can attack you. But as friends, we need to be standing together. Now, many times going through Ephesians chapter 6 and looking at the armor of God, we just focus on the individual responsibility in that. Because there is individual responsibility in taking and putting on the whole armor of God for ourselves. But by the time we reach Ephesians 6 and verse 16, part of that armor we're told to take up is the shield of faith. And literally speaking, that shield was something that was used, yes, to defend oneself. That if it's the case I'm going into battle or someone is coming near me, I can take that shield and I can put it down in front of me and I'll have that protection and that defense. But the Roman army used their shields not just to defend themselves individually. But what the Roman army would do is they would take a line of soldiers in front. And the line of soldiers in front would take their shields, set them down before them, all linked up together. And then behind them, you'd have another row of soldiers who take their shields and put it above their heads. So if you can picture it, what you have is an impenetrable wall of shields in front as well as shields overhead. That way, anyone coming toward them could not break through. The enemies who might be shooting flaming arrows at them would not be able to actually hit the person because it would hit the shields and the shields would protect them. Think about it spiritually. Our shield of faith is meant, yes, to help defend and protect us individually from Satan. But there are times that I need the help of my friends, that I need my fellow soldiers around me to help shield me as well and protect me. There may be times on the battlefield that Satan is able to get a glance against me, that he's able to hurt me for just a little while and get me down. But when my friends who work with me come to my aid to support me, and they come to help comfort me, do you know what they're also doing? Helping defend me. Putting those shields around me so that Satan cannot get to me any longer. That's one reason why it's important that we stay together, that we be here together. Because if we go out on our own, and we don't think that we need this family of friends right here, it's going to be that much easier for Satan to get to us and to keep us down. What a blessing it is to have friends. And Solomon knew and understood that blessing. That's why Solomon writes Ecclesiastes chapter 4, verses 9 through 12 for us. And I hope and pray that as we look through and see the application in these verses, that we can honestly say to everyone here today, you've got a friend in me. And I hope that we recognize the value that we have in this family here in Mount Vernon, that we appreciate that blessing. But above all, I hope and I pray that we can all confidently say, we have this type of a friend in Jesus. We've sang a handful of songs this morning that talk about the friendship we have with Him. And we don't always think about the reality that we have a friend in Jesus, but we honestly do. Jesus Himself tells us in John chapter 15 and verse 14 that you are my friends indeed if you keep my commandments. So if we are doing the best we can each day to live for Him, to serve Him, to tell others about Him, we have a friend in Jesus. And do you know what that means? In Jesus, we have a friend who's here to work with us. That when it is that we're doing our part to fulfill the Great Commission, Jesus tells us in Matthew 28 and verse 20 that I'm with you always to the end of the age. In Jesus, we have a friend who's ready to help pick us up and support us, even when it is that we begin to sink and fall. You remember Peter in Matthew chapter 14? When Peter goes out walking on the water toward Jesus in the midst of the storm. And when Peter loses focus and he loses sight of Jesus and gets distracted by the storm around him, what happens to Peter? He suddenly begins to sink beneath the waves. And in Matthew 14 and verse 31, we find a friend in Jesus who was there for Peter to reach out a hand to grab him and to pull him up and save him. What a friend we have in Jesus. To know that in Him, He's also there to provide us with eternal comfort. Jesus invites all to come to Him who are weary and heavy laden. Because in Matthew 11 and verse 28, Jesus says, I will give you rest. And what a friend we have in Jesus. To know that He's there to defend us and to protect us all the way home. You look in Romans chapter 8, verses 37 to 39, and we find that we are more than conquerors through Jesus, more than conquerors through Him who loved us. And Paul goes through and talks about all of these things and how nothing can separate us from the love of God, which is in Christ Jesus. Because that's the type of friend that Jesus is. But is He your friend today? Because if you've not obeyed His gospel, having repented of your own sins, confessing who He is with a true belief in Him, and put Him on in baptism, then you don't have that friend in Jesus. But you can today. Or if you realize the friend that He is, but you have turned your back on Him, understand that friendships can only go so far. That friendships are only going to work if we're both in it together. Jesus has done everything on His end. How much are we doing on our end? And if we need to make things right with Him, or if we need to make things right with our friends here in this building today, won't we do so? And won't we come now as we stand and as we sing?